بلادي الكويت بلادي الكويت سأبقى معها وتبقى معي بلادي الكويت بلادي الكويت.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I welcome you all here this evening where our Mr. Ahmed Deedat will be discussing, forgive the pun, the burning issue of the Gulf War. The discussion is open-ended in a spirit of openness and candor. Mr. Deedat believes that you have a brotherly right to ask him about his views, as each person is entitled to his own opinion. In fact, it is your God-given right to exercise logic and reasoning to arrive at your own conclusion. We're not taking votes after the meeting to say what is right and what is wrong, but we are giving you the opportunity to arrive at your own conclusion. Agree or disagree, Mr. Deedat will present his view and then it's left up to you. Hazrat Jibreel alayhi salam offered Hazrat Adam alayhi salam to choose one of three gifts granted by Allah. The three gifts were true faith in God, reason, and good manners. Hazrat Adam alayhi salam chose reason, remarking that he who is ill-mannered cannot be possessive of reason, and reason is a sure, short path to true faith. Allah was pleased with Hazrat Adam's choice. In another hadith, the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam stated that man can attain the grade of his fellow who fasts and prays for God only by good manners, and man cannot attain good manners without reason. Once possessive of reason, then he will have true faith and obedience to God and disobedience to his enemy Iblis. In exercising this quality of reasoning and logic, Allah requires us to use our own faculties and abilities to the fullest, individually to reflect, to not be swayed by a crowd mentality. Because this is told to us in Surah 34, verse 46, which says, "Say, I do admonish you on one point, that you do stand up before God. It may be in pairs, or it may be singly, and reflect within yourselves." And finally, I bring to your attention that the Prophet ﷺ said, there are three categories of people that shall not be accountable at all before God for whatever they commit. These three categories are the child until he reaches adolescence, a man asleep until he wakes up, and the mad until he regains reason or sensibility. I know none of us are in the above three categories here tonight, so we are actually accountable for our actions on that basis. So I also ask that in the tradition of our Prophet ﷺ, and in following a true Islamic path, that we exercise our own reasoning and logic tonight. There will always be different opinions. You need only two people to have a difference of opinion. I'm reminded about a little story that somebody once mentioned, that two people looked out of a prison window. One saw the ground, the other saw the stars. Same prison, same window, two perceptions. You will be given the opportunity to ask questions on the discussions tonight. And as I said in my earlier statement, it's in a spirit of openness and candor. Please feel free to participate. And with those words, it is my privilege to call upon the President of the IPCI, Mr. Ahmed Deedat. Jazakallah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب أجيب دعوة الداعي إذا دعان فليستجيبوا لي وليؤمنوا بي لعلهم يرشدون صدق الله العظيم. My dear brethren, I read to you one ayah from Surah Al-Baqarah. Surah Al-Baqarah is the second surah of the Holy Quran, ayah number 186, in which Allah Bari Ta'ala instructs our Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam to tell us, so وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِ أَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. He says, when my servants, people who believe in Allah, when they ask you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِ عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ, about me, tell them I am indeed close to them. In another verse in the Quran, Allah says, وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ, that we are indeed closer to you than your jugular veins, than your very life veins, the very essence of your being. وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي أَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ, and I listen to the supplication of everyone who supplicates to me, everyone who beseeches me for help, everyone who prays to me, I hear. أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي, then let them also listen to my call. It's not enough. You crying to Allah, you praying to Him, you asking Him things is not enough. You must also listen to Him, His instructions. What are you asking? What do you want? أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ فَلْيَسْتَجِيبُوا لِي وَلْيُؤْمِنُوا بِي, and then believe in me, لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْشُدُونَ, that you may be rightly guided. So we hear prayers going up. We know their prayers are going up from the Haramain, from the masjid in Mecca, and from the masjid in Medina, and maybe throughout the whole of Saudi Arabia. The imams there are praying to Allah for help. Ya Bari Ta'ala, give us victory against Saddam. Give us victory against Saddam. It's only natural. Similarly, here in our masjid, our Jummah masjid, last Friday and this Friday, previous Friday and this afternoon, curses are being poured upon the Saudis, and it says victory for Saddam, victory for Saddam. May Allah give victory to Saddam. Right or wrong? The Saudis are crying for help to Allah. Ya Allah, give me this, give me victory. Here we are also crying, give Saddam victory. A South African poet during World War II, he had some cynical verse poem he wrote, a small poem. It appeared in our Mercury. I seem to remember that, the way he put it. It says, God heard the embattled nations sing and shout, people who are at war. Like Germany on one side, France on the other side, England on the other side. They're all crying and shouting to Allah, God this, God that, and God the other thing. You know, say, Allah, do this for me. The other one said, do that for me. Say, you kill my enemy. And that guy is praying that, kill this fellow. Says, good God, said God, I have got my work shared out. This is man. We are telling him what to do. You do this, you do that for me. And everybody is asking opposite things. What will Allah do? So he's telling you that you listen to him. You got to listen to him. But we are not listening. We just want what we want. Our feelings, our emotions. And everybody is working on emotions. So he tells us in Surah Hujurat, that's chapter 49 of the Holy Quran. Now these references, it is a wise thing for you to go and check them up. Not that you distrust me, or anybody for that matter. When they quote you the Quran, try and take a little trouble of going and checking up in the Quran at home. Because the Qurans are available. 5 rands for a volume of 2,000 pages, and when you can't afford it, I said we'll give you free. You got no excuse. The one by Abdullah Yusuf Ali. 5 rands, or if you can't afford it, free. Ask for it. You get it. No excuse. Surah Hujurat, chapter 49, ayah number 9, Allah tells us what we were supposed to do. When you listen to Him, this is what He says. وَإِن طَائِفَتَانِ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ اقْتَتَلُوا فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَهُمَا. So when 2 parties among the believers, if they have a quarrel between them, you, meaning the rest of us, may keep peace between them. But if one of the 2 goes beyond bounds, you know who is right and who is wrong according to your judgment when you have listened to both sides of the case. And now you arrive at a decision that says, look brother, that property belongs to him, give it to him. And he won't listen. Then Allah wants us all to get together and put that guy right. That's what Allah's instructions. If there's a dispute, you listen to the case, weigh the pros and the cons, and then you come to a conclusion, your judgment, that one of them is wrong, then tell him so that, look, you are wrong, put things right. And if he doesn't put it right, then the whole of you, or a lot of us must get together and force him to put the things right. That's his instructions. So Saddam also, if you remember seeing that, his quotation, addressing a group of Arab lawyers in Baghdad. He's telling them, he said, look, if Iraq, he says, God forbid, if Iraq should do such a thing of going along and grabbing another Arab nation, it is the duty of all the other Muslim Arab nations to put Iraq right. This is what he said. But in his heart of heart, in his mind, he knows the whole lot of the Arab nations put together, the whole Muslim world put together can do nothing to him. You can't singe his hairs. So it's very easy to say, so look, a whole lot of you. But if I'm so strong, such a giant, such a Jalut, that 50 of you can do nothing to me, then what do? You have to get help from outside. So the Saudis, they called up a conference called the Makkah Conference. I was also invited. I was there. And learned men from all over the world had gathered. People with whom they were in contact. If you want to say stooges of the Saudis, in inverted commas, you want to say, well, these are all the stooges. I said, okay, all the stooges of the Saudis, they gathered there. Learned men, alims, our alims. And they discussed the pros and the cons. And among the things that they discussed, to make people to see their point of view, they were trying to prove that Saudi Arabia had a right to seek assistance from anybody, even the devil. They didn't use the word, but even Shaitan-e-Buzurg, as Iran was calling America, Shaitan-e-Buzurg, the great Shaitan. Even him, you can seek his aid. And the logic was that our Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, being the best exemplar, we have to follow his example. After the demise of Umm-ul-Mu'minin Khadijatul Kubra and Abu Talib, his uncle, who was his guardian and protector, the persecution started getting worse. It was there all the time, but it started getting worse. So our Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam felt, let me go to Taif, and perhaps the people of Taif might receive that message more readily. So he goes to Taif. And we learn from history that he got a beating. They put dogs upon him. They stoned him. Bloodsore and weary, he seeks refuge. And I'm told, which we can now find out from our learned men, whether it is true or false, is that he got refuge in the home of a Christian. Right or wrong? Look, Allah is there. But he doesn't come down from his throne to put an umbrella over you. He is Musabbibul Asbab. He creates the opportunity of making even the enemy to help you. Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, who brought him up? A kafir, mushrik, the Firaun. You know that? His own mother and father couldn't. They would have killed him. So Allah makes an enemy, his own enemy, a mushrik, to protect and bring him up. Here, a Christian gave protection to our Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Taif. Right or wrong? We got to say no. Survival, it was the right thing he did. You can say, I don't know, you're a Christian. But there are no Muslims there. The others are mushriks. This man gives protection, he said, I take it. Then when he is a little better, little well, he returns to Makkah. But when he returns to Makkah, he knows there's no more protector, no patron. In that community, you need somebody to say, look, I will look after him. He is my man. Abu Talib, though himself not being a Muslim, he said, this is my nephew. You don't touch him. I don't follow his religion. Up to his dying breath, he didn't read the kalima. But he said, don't touch my nephew. If you touch him, the whole of the Bani Hashim will go against you. That's family, blood relationship. Who is there to look after him? Find out. That's what I'm told. I was told at the Makkah conference that the man, I can't remember the names, but the man who gave him that patronship, that I will be his guardian, was a mushrik. And this mushrik was questioned. He said, look, have you accepted this religion now? He said, no. I follow the religion of my forefathers, but I give Muhammad protection. Right or wrong? A mushrik giving our Nabi protection. To say, I will protect him. Then the persecution grew, and the Muslims of the Sahabas had to flee for their life. They made 2 hijras to Abyssinia. Who are the Abyssinians? Muslims? No, Christians. Twice, 2 hijras were made to Abyssinia. Men, women, and children. they had to flee to Abyssinia, seeking refuge there with the Christian king. If the Negus of Abyssinia, if he had helicopters, and he said, look man, you don't have to send your people here, I will send my armada there, and I will give you protection in Makkah. Wouldn't our Nabi have accepted that? Would that not have been better? You still stay at home and somebody looks after you, guards you, instead of you having to run across the sea with your women and children. He would have accepted it. Right or wrong? He says, no, that was the right thing to do. This is what I'm being told. Maybe they're misleading me, they're misguiding me. But this is what I'm told. I'm listening. Then I'm told that when Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq and our Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam left for Medina, the Hijrah, the person to show them the way, there was no, these highways were not there. In the desert you'll get lost and you can die. No directioners once you are gone out in the desert and you just move off a little bit off your track and you're gone. So you needed somebody to guide you. Who was the man who guided this to? A mushrik. Right or wrong? And go on. At the Battle of Khandak, when all the Arabs from all over surrounding countries, some 10,000, it was a stupendous number of an army, a huge army, gathers to conquer the Muslims, they made a trench to keep the people away. They couldn't give battles, there were too many, so they made a trench. But on the flanks, on one of the sides, the Jews were living there. So our Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he made a compact, an agreement with the Jews. He said, look, you stay out of this. You just look after your flank. If they come to attack, you look after your side. That's all. We don't want you to help us to attack the enemy, the mushriks. And if you do that, I will give you half the date crops of Medina. Half the date crops. And one of the Sahabas said, my Iman had come to the lowest ebb at that time. My Nabi, when we wouldn't have given a date to the Jew, on any occasion, we never did any such thing. And now my Prophet, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he's prepared to give half the date crops of Medina for them to remain neutral. Just look after their own. Right or wrong? So when all these things are being told, then drowning man clutches at straws. If you are drowning, maybe you are a swimmer, but how long can you last in deep waters? How long? You are a good swimmer. You must go down. Half an hour, you must go down. And you cry for help. And the Dajjal, veritable Dajjal with the cross on his forehead, he comes about in a boat and he gives you his hand. I want to know what you'd say. Say, no, I can't take your hand. Is that what you'd say? Natural instinct. Somebody, drowning man clutches at straws. Even bubbles, you think the bubbles might save you. This is the instinct of man. God created that instinct. You want to save your life. And the Dajjal comes along and he gives you his hand. You won't take it. Now tell me, you won't take it. Because Allah will judge you. You say, now, you won't take it, will you? You say, no, I would take it. Then if the other guy takes it, you're going to blame him. You shouldn't have. Your wife, your mother or your daughter is drowning. And you are on the bank, helpless because you can't swim. So a rapist or a murderer, he comes on a raft and he's giving his hand. You know the guy. What are you going to shout and tell your ma or your dear wife? Don't take his hand. This guy is a rapist. You don't know what intention he's got. Is that what you're going to say? No, no, be honest. Now, what are you going to say? Nothing. You allow her to be saved. What's happened afterwards, you leave it to Allah. Am I right? So this is the logic. So they passed a resolution at the Makkah conference that Iraq had no right to invade Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia was justified in trying to see that this thing is rectified, the situation, and in the process she can take any help from anybody, including the devil. Right, I come away and says, no, it was a good opportunity for me to get all this knowledge, which I'm not a scholar, I don't know all these things, but if people tell me, I say, no, I can see the point, I can see the point, I can see the point. Now, just before the war started, Saddam also called alims from all over the world, some 300 of them. Well, these people say they were the stooges of Saddam. Like the stooges of the Saudis, you have stooges of Saddam. All learned men, all quoting Quran and Hadith. And at the end of the talk, they passed a resolution that Iraq had a right to take away Kuwait, and this was jihad. Here is a group of alim quoting Quran and Hadith. Here is another group of alims quoting Quran and Hadith, and both giving you contradictory judgments. Where do we stand? How are you going to sit in judgment on them now? We can't. We haven't got the ability. I mean, I would be happy to hear what happened there in Iraq. I don't know. But I know they passed the resolution that this was jihad. How am I to judge now between these two? What am I going to do? So to me, Allah Bari Ta'ala tells me that if we do not hearken, listen to Allah and His Rasul in any problem, you are not a believer. We must go to Allah and His Rasul. Where is Allah? In His book. He is telling us what to do, what not to do. In any problem given to you, what do you do? So look, if there's a conflict, what do you do? He says, try and make peace. And if one guy goes to the extreme, what do you do? So come on, you bring force on that one person to put him right. This is what he tells us. Then in sitting in judgment, this is the nature of man, all. Races, individuals, we are all children of emotion, bundles of emotion. And the greatest motivating factor in emotion is hatred. The thing that makes us to pass judgment very quickly, right or wrong, is hatred. And Allah knows that. He made us. So He knows that, look, this guy, you're going to be motivated by hatred. And we hate the Americans. We, when I say we, including myself, I hate the Americans. I don't, not the public, not the general people. To me, they are good people. The Americans as a people, as a nation. You can go and argue and debate with them. You can reason with them. They're big, so they can take it. You see, they're prepared for a fight, and if you have got the facts on your side, I think you have a good inning with them. But I'm talking about the successive American governments from 47 onwards, from Truman's time onwards. I'm talking about the governments. I only know from there onwards. I don't know before. So I said it's the governments. The government is not necessarily the voice of the masses, but every time they take up a decision, they don't go and take a poll. So what shall we do now? No. The government makes up the decision, and they try and somehow or the other make the people to accept whatever decision they make. So in 1947, November 29th, at the United Nations, America forced the resolution of creating the state of Israel, cutting up Palestine into Israel and Palestine. November 29, 1947. But they didn't have sufficient votes. So Truman said, any of those people, they were the Muslim group, they voted against the partition of Palestine, naturally, and some people who were sympathetic, and they were not getting a majority. The people in favor of America were fewer. So Truman warned, it will be hell to pay France, telling France, you don't vote for this partition of Palestine. France, Greece, Haiti, Liberia, the Philippines, each and every one of these were blackmailed into voting. So if you don't vote, of course, these are all poor nations or needing some help from the Americans. They say, look, if you don't side with me on this issue, we'll cut off the aid. It'll be hell to pay. It'll be hell to pay. So they forced this through the United Nations, partition. Then, to keep this illegitimate child of theirs alive, $3 billion a year gift to build them, strengthen them. Our money, the money is ours, lying with them. They help the Jews to strengthen them to fight us. And every successive war in the Middle East, every time the Muslims went to war to regain their rights, we were not fighting only the Jews, we were fighting the Americans. See, every time you fight the Jew, it's not the Jew alone, it's the Americans behind him that we are fighting. In 1973, the Ramadan War, the Yom Kippur War, 1973, Sadat. For the first time, the Muslims took the initiative. Every other battle, the Muslims were talking like, Nasser, I'll do this and I'll do that, and the Jews made a preemptive strike and wiped them out. 6 days, flattened them all. This is the nature of the Arabs. We have been talking too much, making a big noise. So we get it. For the first time in 1973, they caught the Jews off guard. They became overconfident. America had warned them. He said, look, the Arabs are on the move. They were warned. Through the satellites, they know what's going on. He said, look, the Arabs are on the move. But the guys, they didn't take it seriously. He says, we know these Arabs, our cousins. We know them. They can't fight without making a noise. They will tell you, I'm coming, I'll hit you, and we know what to do then. For the first time, Sadat moved silently. Though they could see it by the satellites, he moved silently. He crossed the Bar-Lev line, the impregnable Bar-Lev line. They went into the Sinai and had the Jews by the throat. The Jews cry for help. And America, with men and machines, through the Azores in the Atlantic, a Portuguese enclave, island, through the Azores, direct into the battlefield. With men and machines, they turned the tables against our brethren. So Sadat realized, he says, look man, we can't beat this devil. Shaitan-e-Buzurg. This is big shaitan, we can't beat him. So let's see if we can make a compromise. So Camp David Accord. We didn't like it. The other Muslim countries didn't like it, but the poor guy has been getting hells every time. Egypt was paying the highest price in 48, in 56, in 67, and now in 73. Every time it's Egypt is getting a hell. So the guy says, look, best thing is compromise, see what I can get out of this by talking. So he did what he did, Camp David Accord. Then it is America that goaded Iraq to invade Iran. You see, they had lost out. When the Shah went, the Americans lost out. Under the Khomeini, these guys couldn't penetrate. No more pork, no more alcohol, no more gambling, we don't want to do business with you, the devil, Shaitan-e-Buzurg. This was the attitude. They wanted to get back, they wanted to put Shah back again. And we know what happened there, that refugee, the hostage crisis, 444 days, hostage crisis, we know. So the next best thing was, put somebody up, man. He says, he put up Saddam. As you saw just now, 8 days before this war, what happened? I'll come to this. He put up Saddam and says, what the Jews did to you guys in 6 days. You can do that old man in 3 days. 3 days, you'll wipe them out. They have already killed 90 generals. A nation that loses 90 generals, in what is the condition of the army? Riff-raff, rubbish, kachra. It's just a walkover. So he was encouraged to attack Iran. And the thing lasted 8 years. 1 million Muslims died on both sides. 1 million. Jihad, you call the jihad? For what? Why did you do that? Why did you go to war? Then he poison gassed the Iranians. Then he poison gassed his own people, the Kurds, Muslims. They're living in that country, different nation. They are not Arabs. Kurds. An unfortunate community, divided among so many different countries there. The Turks have the Kurds in their country. Iraq has Kurds in their country. Iran has Kurds in their country. This nation, poor people, they are a different nation. But they have no country of their own. If somebody has got this part of their country and that one another part. But now when they are asking for a little more rights, he poison gassed them. Halab Jah. Over 1,000 people, men, women, and children, were destroyed by poison gas. I hate Iraq. I hate Iraq for atrocities against the Sunni alims. I have met some of the Sunnis from Iraq in my travels, in America, in Saudi Arabia, Iraqis. They're crying. He says, now we have to leave the country and we can't have even communication with our own people. Sunni alims, Shia alims, his own people, the Kurds, say, I hate the nation. I hate the Americans as much as you. Now I say, I hate the Iraqis. You didn't meet any Iraqi in your lifetime, did you? You had any experience with them? No, not at all. You only have experience with the Saudis because you go there for Umrah, for Hajj. You go there, so you have experience with them. Sad experiences. You're not happy. I'm not happy. But now I hate the Americans. I hate the Iraqis. How am I going to do judgment? And Allah knows this. That you'll be motivated by your prejudice, your hatred. In anything now, you're going to pass judgment because of your hatred. So he says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu. Surah Ma'idah, chapter 5. Ayah number 9 again. Chapter 5, verse 9. Surah Hujurat was chapter 49, verse 9. This is chapter 5, verse 9. Allah says, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu. Kunu qawwamina lillahi. Say, oh, you who believe. Hold fast to Allah. Shuhada bil qist, as witnesses to fair dealing, as just people doing justice. Shuhada lillahi. Wala yajrimannakum shananu qawmin ala alla ta'dilu. And let not the hatred of a people make you to commit injustice against them. I hate the Americans. I hate the Iraqis. But Allah is telling me, leave your hatred. I want you to do justice. I want you to do justice. And let this factor, let not this hatred be a criterion for you doing judging. You are judging because of your hatred. Because you don't like this and you don't like that and you don't like this fellow. So I says, now kill him. Get rid of him. Your hatred. You're not weighing the pros and the cons. What is the problem? You're not looking at the problem. What is the problem? Not who's involved. What is the problem? Iraq takes Kuwait. Right or wrong? This is you have to solve that now. Is that jihad? Is that jihad? That's what the whole world, Saddam says jihad. When he took Kuwait, he invaded Kuwait. Was it jihad when he invaded Iran? Million Muslims are jihad. If you believe so, you have a right to. He goes and takes Kuwait. Is that jihad? You got your grievances. Allah is telling you how to solve your grievances. You have a quarrel. Allah tells you how to solve your quarrel. Is that how you solve it? You see, the whole Muslim world was sympathetic at this juncture with Iraq because of the promises she had made. The promises were half of Israel I will destroy. And we hate the Jews for what they have done to our people, what they are doing. And we want somebody to do that. This is natural. During World War II, when the Germans, they attacked these Allied forces, and Britain went into the war against Germany, and America came in, and France and all that put together, Allied, they called them the Allied armies, at that time. At that time, I was a young man, married man, but I had a radio, and I used to switch on 8 o'clock in the evening for Berlin radio. And the Berlin radio started with, says, 8 o'clock, Berlin radio, or Berlin, whatever they said. And it started with a dong. Every dong meant an Allied ship sunk. And we used to listen. 1, 2, dong. 3, 4, shh, 10 today. We feel so happy, wallah. We feel so happy. 10 Allied ships sunk. 30 ships sunk today. Ooh, the joy that we get. What for? What for? You love the Germans? You love the Germans? We love the Germans, all the Indians. All the people from India, we are all Indians. Everybody is happy. You know that? When Japan struck, we were happy. HMS Royal sunk and HMS Wood sunk. The pleasure we were getting. The joy. We were being tickled. Why? You love the Germans. You think the Germans would have done, they would make better masters, would they? Would they have made better masters than the British? No. Because the British were sitting on our chests. For the time being, get rid of this fellow, let him die. Hatred. So, my dear brothers, I can carry on, but I would rather give you that privilege. I'd rather give you the privilege. You might have certain questions. You might have some knowledge which might put me right. I want to be put right, wallah. all these ideas about Saudi money, if you want to ask about that, this is not the time. But if you want to know about Saudi money, you come and ask me, talk to me. What motivates me? You come and see me. I am prepared to talk to you. But now what I have spoken is not what Saudi Arabia tells me to say. What I am doing is not what Saudis tell me what to do. This is according to my God-given intelligence, and my contact with Allah's kalam makes me to think and say what I am saying. Now I am open to questions. Yes. Islam.
And whatever I'm saying in the spirit of ukhuwah, and respecting you as my elder brother.
Jazakallah.
But I'd like to take issue with some of the things you said. Firstly, when you say drowning man clutches the last straw. Surah 4, this is ayat 144.
Right.
Allah subhanahu says, Ya ladina amanu la tattakhizu wal kafirina awliya min dunil mu'minin.
Right.
Those who believe, do not take disbelievers as protectors in dunil mu'minin instead of, in place of
Muslims.
believers.
Beautiful.
Now, this is a clear ayat.
Right.
Clear cut. It's not mutashabihat.
No.
And in the light of, when we want to relate it to the Kuwait incident,
Right.
based on that ayat, I feel Saudi, in the first place, Saudi didn't ask for American help. The fact is, America didn't ask no permission to retaliate because she's got a vested interest in the oil fields of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, and she will, in the 1958, when there was a coup in 1958 already.
53. Musaddiq. In the time of Musaddiq.
1958, according to the Guardian,
nice.
in 1958 there was a military coup in Kuwait. In Iraq.
Oh, in Iraq, right.
In Iraq, there was a military coup in Iraq.
Right.
And immediately, Britain and America set a series of chain of reaction, where they sent a ship into the air, sent forces into Lebanon, and Eisenhower at the time said we would even use nuclear weapons if necessary to safeguard our oil interest in the Middle East.
Right.
Winston Churchill at that time, now these are classified documents between the British and American governments, which was only decoded after the 30 years have expired, and it appeared in the Guardian newspaper. I didn't bring the...
No, it's accepted. You see, when I tell, no, you're lying now, bring the proof,
Okay.
then it's a different matter. We are accepting whatever you say.
1958 already, and the words of Eisenhower and Winston Churchill to the effect is that even if we put a regime as a compromise in Kuwait, we'll put somebody on condition that that person, the moment any unfriendly force wants to come and make a coup there, we will ruthlessly intervene to safeguard our oil interests in the Gulf, in Kuwait and in the Persian Gulf. So if we accept that fact,
Yes.
and they did it.
Yes.
They require they will ruthlessly intervene.
Right.
Use any measures.
Right.
whatsoever.
Agreed.
So what I am saying is, firstly, Saudi didn't ask for any help.
No, you see.
Because-
when you say didn't ask for any help, how do you know that Fahad is crying to Bush to say, look, I need assistance?
Because I'll tell you why. I'll respond.
But now,
Based on this-
what's happening now? The ayah that you quoted.
Right.
We are now drifting off into all history. See, I accept the ayah.
Right.
Allah is telling us, he said, look, you must not take the non-believers as protectors and friends
In place of.
believers. Right.
So-
Now that is the crux of the whole thing.
Okay.
All the history you are telling me, I agree.
Right.
But now here it is. Now look, this is contradictory to that.
Yes.
See, that is what we have to discuss.
All right. So even
In preference to the believers.
All right.
If you have believers, I will say, now look, we can settle their matter.
Right.
We don't have to get an outsider.
Correct.
Right. But if you haven't got it, because now when we can see that what was required, Saudi Arabia, I don't know whether you know, it looks a huge chunk of land. The only thing you see on the map of the world in the center, in the Middle East, is Arabia. You don't see Iraq, you don't see Kuwait, and you don't see the UAE. The only thing you notice is Arabia. Not knowing that this Arabia has got a standing army of 65,000. At the time when the trouble started, 65,000. They're talking about 100,000 now. 65,000 against 1 million. Iraqis are claiming 1 million. This guy has got 65,000. Now you can argue, say, look, why the hell you must have only 65,000? You are such a small nation. Why didn't you get so many Pakistanis here in your country? Why didn't you have so many? That's, again, now you're confusing the things. The thing is, the guy has got 65,000 and this guy has got 1 million. And if he feels threatened, he needs somebody to protect him, he's going to find out the strongest guy who can do the job. You see, all the Arab countries put together. I said, forget the Arab countries, the whole Muslim world put together.
You see, so coming to that ayat, I still maintain the Quran is clear. It doesn't tell you if you are weak, then go to the disbeliever. It's a clear ayat. La tattakhuzu wal kafirin awliya. Doesn't say
don't take them for friends. Use the in preference to the believers. You quoted just now.
In preference to them.
Right.
Don't
In
take
preference, when you have the believers there,
Right.
you can open the
I
eyes.
just checked
Right,
yeah.
right.
In preference to the
If
believers.
in preference to the believers. If the believers are there, my brothers are there to help me to put this brother right. I don't have to call a non-believer. Don't have to go to the government.
Yeah, no, my question.
To the Afrikaner or to the African. We should be able to settle our own problems. But when you are not able to do, like our Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the examples I gave, a Christian gives him protection. A mushrik gives him patronship. He is sending the Sahabas across the Red Sea to a Christian country to give them refuge. And on and on and on. He is making compact with the Jews. So now this is all contrary to that ayah. If you want to say, look, this is all wrong, man. That means now you're telling that our Nabi did everything that was wrong. This was Christian, mushrik, Christian, mushrik. So now he says, now look, we have to now find out what does it mean in preference to, if there were believers there, if there was a Muslim nation instead of Abyssinia, and our Nabi sends the Muslims to Abyssinia, he says, no. There's Pakistan there, if there was. He says, send them to Pakistan, man. And send them to Syria, man. Send them to Egypt. But none of these were Muslims. The only people who could have given them refuge were the Christians at that time. But Allah says, in preference to the believers, you don't go to the non-Muslim.
So, yeah, the point is, what attempts did Saudi, if we take again that Saudi asked for help, because this all took place in the United Nations, what attempts did Saudi make to go to the Muslim world at large to say, I want help? Why? If that
Look, brother, look.
procedure.
You know how long it took America to get ready there for war? How long? 6 months. The mightiest military force on earth. That nation, it took them to gather their armies and prepare for the attack. It took them 6 months with all the logistics. Tonight's paper, you read the Daily News. There are 100 ships are on the way to the Middle East for food supply, to keep these people supplied with food and their needs. 100 ships. Is the whole Muslim world put together? Could they have, in case there was a confrontation, you could have gone with 100 ships. There are 2,500 trucks. They are conveying these things to the front line. 2,500 trucks. Pakistan, logistics of it. Can Pakistan would have helped with what? And Egypt with what? And Bangladesh with what? You see, it's very easy to talk.
You see, I
The whole Muslim...
You're talking militarily, but we're talking, when you call it Suja Hurjarat also, فَأَصْلُ بَيْنَ أَخْوَيْكُمْ.
Yeah.
That what was the attempts made? Because Saddam nowhere mentioned, I'm going to attack Saudi next. Nowhere when he went into Kuwait, he says, Saudi, you next on the list for them.
He didn't say he was going to attack Kuwait. He said he was not going to attack.
He attacked. All this
So now,
after he
attacked his brother without warning.
Now,
Did he give warning that I'm going to attack you? Or he just went along and gobbled it?
you see, on that.
Wait one
I'll answer
second.
that.
If there are any other questions, look, this is like going on to a debate now. If there are any other, no, you're monopolizing the floor now. Look, you asked a question, I responded.
All right, I want to complete my point. I
Yes.
do this back. You agree then with the statement of America and Britain that they are there to safeguard the oil interests?
Of course.
You agree with
Yes. I said, you heard me say that if Kuwait was producing sausages, America wouldn't have gone there.
He came late. So
You missed out.
missed
Yeah. So now I'm now re-lecturing the whole thing again, thinking that you didn't hear what I said.
So at least we agree on one issue, that they are there to safeguard their own interests.
No,
the interests
no
of
conflict. I said, we know.
Right, okay.
The devil is there for his own.
I'll give somebody else a chance, but if you agree on that point, then I will carry my argument to the next.
Because he was not there from the beginning, so he's asking.
You see, this is very bad. Very bad. You see, if I knew, I would have stopped you in your stride.
No, but
Because now you're taking unfair, look, he's taking unfair advantage over the other people's rights.
okay, carry on. We'll give somebody else a chance.
Yes, yes,
Mr. Deedat, the ayat that the brother quoted
yes.
about the Muslims not taking Jews and
Or any non-Muslim.
that would obviously apply to all Muslim nations.
Exactly.
In whatever position.
In whatever
that
position.
they
Right,
hold.
right, right.
Would you like to comment on that in respect of positions of power held by Christians in Muslim governments?
Yes. We are not supposed to take help and assistance from the non-Muslim. In preference to believers. Means if the Muslim is there, you don't go to the non-Muslim. But now, most of these Muslim, so-called Muslims, Iraq, the brains who are running that country, who? Tariq Aziz. I know the whole Muslim community, we say Tariq Aziz is a Muslim. The guy, the ambassador there, day before yesterday on CNN, the guy appeared in that interview with that Larry King. His name is Abdul Amir. What do you say? Muslim. Any name you hear that sounds to us, Abdul means Muslim. So Abdul means a servant. You can be servant of anybody. You see? Abdul Masih, Muslim? No, it says Abdul, because he said Abdul. It says Tariq, Aziz. Tariq is the man who conquered Gibraltar. Gibraltar is Jabal Tariq. The man who crossed into Spain, the first Muslim, the conqueror of Spain. His name was Tariq. He is Tariq, Aziz. He says, man, this is the name of Allah. Wallahu Azizun Zuntikam. So, Muslim. These are Christian Marxists are ruling the country. They have a right. In Indonesia, it is the Christians are ruling there. Suharto is the Muslim. But all his advisors are Christians. Most of his key ministers are Christians. That's right. Is that Islam allow that? No, nobody says a word. That Sadat fellow, his wife was Christian. Our King Hussein, his wife was Christian. Why is it that nobody ever spoke about it? He says, what the hell is this, man? You know, in the whole Muslim world, 1,000 million Muslims, you can't get a wife. Suharto can't get a Muslim wife. Sadat can't get a Muslim wife. King Hussein of Jordan can't get a Muslim wife. This guy, Saddam, he can't get a Muslim advisor. In a nation of 18 million, you can't get a Muslim guy to give you advice. No, that means now you can see that the rot is from through and through. But now, we say here now, we have some reason. He says, no, I want to justify. Saudi Arabia shouldn't have done that. She shouldn't have. I am not here, I've got no brief for Saudi Arabia. But we are talking objectively. If the person feels threatened, you know, when you talk about the drowning man, where you hear them? Yeah. So if you are drowning, I'm telling you, I know you can't drown in that amount of water, man. Damn it, are you crying for help? I know the depth of that water. If you just stood there like that, you can't drown. But you think you're drowning and you're going and you are going to drown. So you cry for help. There's no sense in me saying, look, the guy can't drown, man. Am I going to reason with you while you're drowning? I said, send a lifeboat, send a lifebuoy or something. Do something, throw a rope to him and get him out. I can't say you can't drown. You have no right to, I have no right to say that. You have no right to say that Saudi Arabia didn't feel threatened. When this brother of yours, he told you, I don't know whether you saw that quotation, whether you read that Al-Burhan of ours, where we quote what Saddam says. He says, if any Arab country ever did any such thing, all the Arabs put together must put them right. They must send the Arab armies. Now I said the guy was speaking with tongue in his cheek. Meaning he knew that all the Arab armies put together, you can't singe his hair. Learned men have been making statements. We are 57 independent Muslim nations today. 57. हम लोग सब क्या हिजड़े हैं? That was the question. हम लोग सब क्या हिजड़े हैं? What do you take us for? Are we morphees? What are you going to say? In our hearts and say, no. हमारी औरतें भी लड़ने के लिए तैयार है. Look, this is very good rhetoric. It's nice for talking, putting some spirit into you. We are all men. हम लोग कुछ हिजड़े नहीं हैं. We are not emasculated. We are not gays. Very nice to talk. 57 independent Muslim nations. We haven't singed the hair of the Jew in 40 years. Now I say, if you are not hijrah, then what are you? We. What are you? So look, there's so many Muslim nations. Damn it all, what have you done? 57 Muslim nations, you can't sing the hair of the Jew. And that Jew is only 4 million. And we are 1,000 million. So just talk, hot air is reality of things. You know you can't do anything to Saddam. Yes, my son.
Sir, I've got one question. What about Iraq's claims on Kuwait on historical grounds?
Yes. Some brothers say that, you see, at one time, Kuwait was a part of Iraq.
That's the last question because
Right.
time is going.
Right. So at what stage did this Kuwait come into being? Or at what stage? It was, I think, after the World War II. France, Britain and all, they cut it up and said, now look, this is Iraq, this will be Kuwait, this will be the UAE, so that they can exploit them better. But just before that, the whole area was the Ottoman Empire. The whole thing belonged to Turkey. If this Kuwait belonged to Iraq, then Iraq as well as Kuwait and the UAE belong to Turkey. Can Turkey claim, say, look man, this belonged to us before you guys were created, this country as Iraq and Kuwait and the UAE, Bahrain, and this was all Ottoman Empire. The Turkey hasn't got the right. I said, but on that same principle, we can claim Spain. We ruled Spain for 800 years. If you go to Spain, the only thing that they can show you, besides the bullfights and the castanets, the women, they dance and they use those things on the fingers, click, click, click. Besides that, the only thing they can show you is the Alhambra, the Muslim monuments that the Muslims built, our fathers built. That's the only thing that they can show you. So have you a right to go and claim that country again? After we ruled it for 800 years, it belonged to us for 800 years. Have you a right? On the same principle, if Iraq is entitled to Kuwait, because at one time it was a part, on that very principle the Jews are claiming the West Bank. They said this was Judea and Samaria. 2,000 years ago, this was ours. Have they a right? No. You see, you can't have double standards. If you say Iraq has a right over Kuwait, then the Jews have a right over the West Bank, we have a right over Spain, the Dutch have a right over Indonesia back again, and the Portuguese are once more again to Mozambique. 500 years they ruled there. No. That type of disputes now, I said, look, if you have, go to the World Court. Go and fight it out there. You just don't go and grab a nation because the nation is small. Your promise was Israel, man. Look, he's hoodwinked the whole lot of us. He's taken you right off the track. Israel was the target. Half of Israel he was going to destroy. What has he done? What is he doing? What can he do? No, once you took Kuwait, now he's so embroiled that he's going to lose everything, the opportunity. I was crying, and the Muslims were crying that if he just withdrew, man, he said, right, okay, but the stick is still in his hands. The stick, meaning his army, is still intact. He comes out with that. Now he says, solve the Palestinian problem. With all your rockets and all that you can... So now they're all geared for Israel. He says, now I'll press the button. If you don't, man, the problem would be solved. But as we say, in our language, it's a saap bimare or lathi bina tute. You kill the snake without breaking the stick. The stick's still in your hand, intact, your army. Now everything is gone. The opportunity is gone. You can't do anything to Israel. Maybe you'll give another 50 years respite to Israel. This war, and the greatest benefactor of this will be the Jews. What you tried to do and what you're doing, because your intentions were not right. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
The president of the Islamic Propagation Center International, Mr. Ahmed Deedat, says President Saddam Hussein of Iraq has no grounds to declare a holy war. Contribution follows in about 5 seconds.
As a Muslim, if he was attacked without any just cause, then he can say, it's a holy thing to do is to defend yourself. But him going and invading Kuwait, what was jihad or holy about that? Him poison gassing his own people, the Kurds, what was holy about that? What was holy about him attacking Iran and impose war on that country, costing 1 million Muslim lives on both sides? What was holy about that? So this is the hoax. This holiness of his is a hoax.
So that even if the United Nations forces did attack him now, could he not really call it a holy war?
Because he started it. He is giving cause for such a thing, going along and raping Kuwait. And people had a right. The whole opinion says that, look, you had no right to invade that country and gracefully leave the place, which he refuses to do. As a matter of fact, you see, as an Arab, he's advising other Arabs. In November 1988, he's addressing a group of Arab lawyers in Iraq, and this is what he told them. Then, I'm quoting, "An Arab country does not have the right to occupy another Arab country. If Iraq should deviate from the right path, we would want Arabs to send their armies to put things right. If Iraq should become intoxicated by its power and more to overwhelm another Arab state, the Arabs would be right to deploy their armies to check it." I suppose he was talking with tongue-in-cheek, knowing full well that all the Arab armies put together, the Khan says, hey, in the House of Islam, the Holy Quran tells us that if there is a dispute between two brothers, it is the duty of all the other Muslims to bring them together, bring about peace. But if one of them, he goes to the extreme, it is the duty of all the others by force to put him there. But now the whole Muslim world put together, we can't do anything to him because he's so big. And America comes to the rescue. They have their own motives. Because if Kuwait was producing sausages, America wouldn't have gone to war for her. But now they were called. And as such now, they put themselves into a situation that they can't back down. They've got to solve the problem. And the only people who will benefit from this, to me, are the Israelis.
Well, now, talking about the Israelis, that's another matter.
Yes.
If the Israelis actually get involved in this war,
Yes.
is there, you know the Muslim mind, is there a chance that some of the Muslims who are now on the side of the United Nations force would go over to Iraq?
No, I don't think the official armies, being disciplined and they know what is involved, they would be quite on a different level from the masses. The masses are thinking emotionally. And emotionally, we have cultivated a hatred for America. Not the people of America, but the governments of America. The ideal thing would have been that Saddam give up Kuwait. Once he had given it up, the Palestinian question would have been solved immediately after that. Because the whole world now has reached that pitch. See, previously, every time the United Nations pass resolutions, America vetoes it. But now, the American public also will not allow that to carry on like that. He said, look, this is a permanent problem here, and it will last for 100 years, it will last for 1,000 years. There is no solution unless they come to terms, the Arabs and the Jews. And the only way that can be done is to sit down and talk. So, to me, he's lost the opportunity.
You spoke about Muslim people thinking emotionally.
Yes.
Here in South Africa,
Yes.
are they also emotionally against the United Nations force at this present time?
That is correct. You see, now, the intellectuals think differently. We can see the pros and the cons. And we are advised in the Holy Quran that let not the hatred of a people cause you to commit injustice against them. And people, once they see that, when you show them, they get subdued. They say, no, I can see that we are thinking emotionally. I don't like Iraq, I don't like the Jews, I don't like America, but let that not be a basis for your judgment.
بلادي الكويت بلادي الكويت سأبقى معها وتبقى معي بلادي الكويت بلادي الكويت تكلم أيا مدفعي بلادي الكويت بلادي الكويت سأبقى معها وتبقى معي بلادي الكويت بلادي الكويت تكلم أيا مدفعي بلادي الكويت بلادي الكويت نموت وتحيا الكويت وتحيا الكويت نموت وتحيا الكويت وتحيا الكويت وتحيا الكويت بلادي الكويت بلادي الكويت سأبقى معها وتبقى معي بلادي الكويت بلادي الكويت تكلم أيا مدفعي بلادي الكويت بلادي الكويت نموت وتحيا الكويت وتحيا الكويت نموت وتحيا الكويت وتحيا الكويت وتحيا الكويت الله أكبر يا وطن الله معنا بالمحن الله أكبر ينكسر لن ينكسر لا لا شموخنا لن ينكسر لن ينكسر وطاء وطاء وذات الوطن وطاء وطاء ولا نستكن الله أكبر يا وطن الله معنا بالمحن الله أكبر يا وطن الله معنا بالمحن قوي الإرادة الشعب قيادة الشعب قيادة
The enemies of Israel are not our enemies. And the struggle of the Palestinians for independence and for their own home is a struggle we fully support.
December the 8th, 1987, violent confrontation between the Palestinian Arabs and the Israeli occupation army and Zionist settlers broke out in occupied Palestine. This popular revolution in the West Bank and Gaza Strip is a struggle against all that the Zionist occupation represents: subjugation and tyranny. The children, stripped of everything except their faith in God and their cause, created the uprising or intifada in the Palestinian lands occupied since 1948. It was the Shabab, the young Palestinian protesters, armed only with stones, who raised the outlawed Palestinian flag and established themselves as a force anxious Israeli occupation authorities could not afford to dismiss. The Palestinian uprising and the Israeli response to it have brought about a change in international opinion with regards to the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and indeed towards the whole Palestinian problem. Despite all suppressive measures and collective punishments, the Intifada reconfirms the Palestinian people's determination to gain freedom, independence, and to re-establish a Palestinian state on their national soil.
الثورة فوت شعب والثورة للثوار اعطيني يما حجر حنكمل المشوار اعطيني يما حجر.
Following the attempted burning of Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem in 1969, the Islamic Conference Organization was formed to promote peace and security in the Islamic world, currently threatened by the Zionist occupation of Arab lands. The organization has pledged solidarity with the Palestinian people, supporting their brave rebellion. A fact confirmed by His Highness the Emir of Kuwait, Sheikh Jabir al-Ahmed al-Jabir al-Sabah, at the third summit of the Islamic Conference Organization held in Holy Mecca in January 1981, under the chairmanship of the late King Khalid bin Abdulaziz. In his opening speech at the 5th Islamic Conference Organization Summit, held in January 1987 in Kuwait, the chairman, His Highness the Emir of Kuwait, warned against Zionist expansionist designs on Arab territory and its aggressive policies covering the past, the present, the future, the land and the people.
Coalition between international Zionists and other interested world powers remains the axle of conspiracy against the Palestinian people, to displace and deprive them of their land and to support an alien Zionist presence on it. On November 2nd, 1917, Arthur Balfour, then the British Foreign Secretary, announced Britain's commitment to the creation of a homeland for the Jews in Palestine, without, so he said, prejudice to the rights of existing non-Jewish communities.
The Balfour Declaration constituted the start of the Palestinian tragedy.
Zionist intentions and colonial plans to drive a wedge in the heart of the Arab world, draining its strength and preventing its unity, was evident in the Sykes-Picot Treaty, in which Arab holdings of the Ottoman Empire were divided between Britain and France, with Palestine falling under the British mandate. A new era in Palestinian history began when General Allenby led British forces into Jerusalem at the end of World War I in 1918. The Mandate government opened the door for Jewish immigration to Palestine.
As Jewish immigration to Palestine accelerated, the Palestinians took defensive action. The uprising of 1935, which took place in the hills of Ya'bad near Jenin and was led by Sheikh Izzuddin al-Qassam, played a major role in spurring the Palestinians into the revolution of 1936, which continued until September 1939. The death of Sheikh al-Qassam and several of his companions made it clear to the rest of the Palestinians that violence was the only language effective in dealing with the British authorities, that armed resistance and national faith are the only path to freedom and independence. Civil unrest and a 6-month general strike against the settlement of Zionists culminated in the prolonged violent clashes of 1936. Spurred on by Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who was the leader of the National Palestinian Movement and head of the Higher Arab Authority that was formed in April 1936. It was this authority that established the Holy Jihad armed force led by Abdul Qadir al-Husseini. The British authorities continued to use all their power to crush the revolution and encourage Zionist settlers to use aggressive measures against the Palestinians. Palestinian losses were estimated to exceed 19,000 wounded and killed. Thus, once the stage was set for Zionist settlement in Palestine, Britain appealed to the United Nations in order to find a solution for the now so-called Palestinian problem, an obvious attempt at shifting responsibility. And in response, on November the 29th, 1947, the United Nations issued a resolution to partition Palestine, recommending the establishment of a Jewish state, an Arab state, and a third international zone in Jerusalem. Despite the fact that at the time the resolution was passed, the Palestinian population in Palestine was in excess of 1 million in comparison to a mere 560,000 Jews, the Jewish state was nevertheless awarded a larger area amounting to over 56%, whereas the Arab state amounted to under 43% of the total Palestinian landmass, leaving less than 1% for the international free zone in Jerusalem. British forces pulled out of Palestine on the announcement of the partition, and on May the 15th, 1948, the Jewish Agency declared the creation of the Israeli entity in Palestine. From then on, Zionist aggression forced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to leave their villages and homes and flee, seeking refuge in the safety of the West Bank and Gaza, then still under Jordanian and Egyptian control. Many landed in squalid refugee camps, where they remain awaiting a just solution to their problem. In an attempt to alleviate some of the Palestinian suffering in the diaspora, the United Nations created the Relief and Works Agency, which commenced activity on May 1st, 1950. Since then, the agency has established many schools and medical centers in various refugee camps.
The dangerous consequences of a Zionist presence to the security and stability of Arabia and the entire world became increasingly evident when Israel embarked on a series of aggressive acts on neighboring Arab states. Notably, the triple aggression on Egypt in 1956 by the joint forces of the French, British and Israelis, the occupation of the Sinai Peninsula and the Syrian Golan Heights, in addition to the West Bank and Gaza Strip on June the 5th, 1967, resulting in the expulsion of additional numbers of Palestinians for the second and third times in less than 3 decades, and more recently, the invasion of Lebanon in 1982. Since the 1967 war, the Zionists have further encroached on Arab land in the West Bank and Gaza Strip to establish new settlements, yet again proving their expansionist ambitions.
The number of settlements constructed in the West Bank and Gaza since then exceed 130, occupied by nearly 60,000 Jewish settlers. For the past 21 years, the Zionist occupation authorities have aggressively pursued a policy to drive and displace Palestinians from what remains of their homeland, apparent in the legislation by which they are allowed to confiscate Arab lands, water rights and wells, forcefully evict Arab inhabitants, or coerce them to become laborers serving the Israeli economy.
These same authorities blame what they call extreme Zionist elements for a series of aggressive acts aimed at destroying the Arab and Muslim character of Palestine, starting with the setting of Al-Aqsa Mosque ablaze, firing at worshippers inside the Mosque of the Holy Rock, repeatedly attacking universities and schools, bombing of mosques and churches, poisoning of students, and organized suppression of Palestinian communities in the cities, villages and camps.
Not satisfied with oppressive arrests, demolishing houses and deporting Palestinian citizens, the Zionist occupation authorities further discriminated against the Arabs by issuing racist legislation concerning wages and Palestinian workers. It also linked the economy of the West Bank and Gaza to its own, forcing economic dependence on both, thus providing itself with cheap Palestinian labor and a major market to sell Israeli goods.
Such crimes against humanity have inevitably led to worsening of economic, social and health conditions in the West Bank and Gaza. For example, in the Gaza Strip, where unemployment is rife, over 750,000 Palestinians live in squalor and deprivation. Nonetheless, occupation authorities impose high taxes and prevent them from exporting their agricultural products, except through Israeli brokers.
This has fueled the feeling of bitter oppression and has stirred the Palestinians to their current fury of rebellion. The ex-mayor of Gaza, Rashad al-Shawa, elaborates.
They have been taxed so heavily to the extent that no one can pay his taxes. People feel that they cannot pay their taxes. They are working and working and working just to earn a loaf of bread.
In other words, you're saying that the economic crisis is behind the riots?
Well, an economic crisis is there, but what has been more effective than the economic crisis is the bitterness in the hearts of the people.
Zionist oppression, continually denying the Palestinians their fundamental civil and political rights, incited the violence which erupted on December the 8th, 1987.
The Gaza Strip became a battleground on which the Palestinians, armed merely with stones, faced the heavily armed Israeli soldiers. Many were martyred.
The uprising quickly spread from Gaza to the West Bank and Jerusalem. Various cities, villages and camps of the West Bank became sites of bloody confrontation. Hundreds were caught and beaten, others injured by rubber bullets. Rubber, that is, with a core of steel. Many were killed.
The most violent clashes to take place during the early days of the uprising happened in Jerusalem. 5,000 soldiers were sent to control the situation created by the Palestinian children of the stones. Without respect for the holiness of Al-Aqsa Mosque, these troops stormed in, firing tear gas at worshippers. Meanwhile, Zionist propagandists desperately tried to convince the world that everything was under control.
The brave children of the stones were undeterred. The uprising, although spontaneous, was well organized, well-timed, and bravely executed. This, more than anything else, was cause for international surprise. Thus, as the uprising continued, the Palestinians grew bolder, and Israeli confidence waned, as world opinion and sympathy rapidly turned against them. Faced by brave men, women, children, and the elderly, armed only with stones and improvised primitive weapons, the Zionists lashed out in all their military might. Nevertheless, Palestinian determination to expel the occupiers persisted. Without success, many methods were used to terminate the uprising. The imposition of curfews and the storming of cities, villages, and camps did little to halt the rebellion. Rather, the greater the suppression, the fiercer the Palestinian determination became, and the more violent the clashes between the two opposing sides. Stone throwing developed into carefully aimed slingshots and the hurling of nail and Molotov cocktail bombs. Every Palestinian participated.
The occupation forces retaliated with heavy arms, killing and wounding many Palestinians. Meanwhile, the concentration of Palestinian detainees grew alarmingly.
Still, the uprising didn't stop. The enemy's next step was to harass prominent Palestinian citizens, to threaten, to arrest, and to viciously deport them.
Attacks were indiscriminate. The uneducated and unskilled, the educated and professional alike. What little freedom the press had was eradicated. And finally, the authorities resorted to a military and economic siege of the West Bank and Gaza camps.
Electricity, water, and food supplies were cut off, but deprivation and hunger did nothing to weaken Palestinian resolve. They continued to announce to the whole world that Palestine and the Palestinian people do exist and that they would endure.
The callous beating and burying alive of Palestinians and other equally repugnant and appalling acts are all part of Israel's policy to crush the uprising. The Jews have occupied Palestine with Nazi-like zeal, showing no respect for the holy places, brutally attacking worshippers and terrorizing men and women alike.
2 months and still no sign of respite in the uprising, as Sheikh Rabin tells the world of further measures to counteract the Palestinian defiance and civil disobedience.
We are going to make it clear by every means that it's in our possession, within the limits of our laws, to make sure that the population in the territories, in Gaza area, will realize that through violence and terror they'll achieve nothing but more suffering to themselves.
In response, the Palestinians who remain inside Palestine since its occupation in 1948 lent full support to their brothers in the West Bank and Gaza by mounting a general strike, disrupting life in Galilee and Negev. The uprising spread to the occupied Syrian Golan Heights, where demonstrations and clashes broke out between Syrian citizens and the occupation forces. Many Syrians were badly injured.
Israel's reaction to the West Bank and Gaza uprising stirred angry opposition internationally. Arab foreign ministers held an emergency meeting in Tunis, where Kuwait's Deputy Premier and Foreign Minister, Sheikh Sabah al-Ahmed al-Jaber al-Sabah, stated that the uprising confirms the Palestinian people's determination to reject the occupation and secure their just rights. Possibly the most important decision reached by the Arab League Council was the formation of a 7-man committee to stay apprised of the events of the uprising and to promote support for it.
The United Nations Security Council held 3 emergency sessions to discuss Israeli repressionary measures against Palestinians and their deportation from the occupied territories. Many representatives condemned such repression and demanded that Israel should immediately cease such actions and recognize and respect the rights of the Palestinians.
The enemies of Israel are not our enemies. And the struggle of the Palestinians for independence and for their own home is a struggle we fully support.
Israel's severe and brutal policy has failed to curb the rioting and end the uprising. Rather, it has succeeded in disturbing the world. American and European TV networks, prior to broadcasting violent scenes from occupied Palestine, warned viewers of the savagery they were about to see. Israeli soldiers were seen ruthlessly breaking young Palestinian limbs, burying live Palestinians, storming the hospitals, dragging out the injured, and attacking medical staff, thus hindering treatment to wounded Palestinians.
The Israelis were exposed.
The suffering of the Palestinian people remains a matter of great concern to the Islamic Conference Organization. His Highness the Emir of Kuwait, Sheikh Jaber al-Ahmed al-Jaber al-Sabah, in his capacity as chairman, together with the General Secretariat of the organization, conducted a series of meetings aimed at supporting the Palestinian people in their brave uprising.
Consequently, His Highness met with PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat and Secretary General of the Islamic Conference Organization, Sharif ad-Din Bezada. Messages were sent to leaders of Islamic countries, urging them to adopt and effect positive measures of support for the Palestinians, stripped and cheated of all human rights. His Highness said the odious Zionist oppression of Palestinian land is against these rights and represents a provocative and dangerous disregard for all human rights.
A delegation from the Arab universities in the occupied lands gave the Emir a full account of the events of the uprising, and in response, His Highness expressed a clear understanding of the Palestinian problem and of the nature of colonial Zionist attacks. When His Highness received a delegation from the Palestinian community in Kuwait, he warned against proposed solutions which Israel could manipulate for the purpose of destroying the uprising. His Highness said, subjugation and oppression from the occupier and apathy from the Arab nation compelled the Palestinian people to revolt. We must support these people, not merely by words and parades of military strength, but by prompt, effective action.
In response, the Jerusalem Committee, chaired by King Hassan II of Morocco, held an emergency meeting to discuss the West Bank and Gaza situation and the acts of aggression directed against the Palestinian citizens and Al-Aqsa Mosque. A communique condemning Israeli suppressive acts and calling for an immediate stop to them was issued. It also urged Arabs and Muslims to support the Palestinians in their just struggle against the Israeli occupation.
A Palestinian leadership emerged in the occupied lands to take on responsibility of directing and organizing the uprising, ensuring its continuation and progress. The Israeli authorities found themselves confronted by a new dilemma, whether control of the West Bank and Gaza Strip warrants the high price it commands. In flyers distributed across the West Bank and Gaza, the leaders of the uprising outlined the struggle and methods of confrontation. Responding, the Palestinians followed instructions to raise the Palestinian flag by mounting labor strikes, boycotting Israeli goods, resigning from employment in occupation authority offices, and confronting disloyal Palestinians known to be Israeli collaborators. Recently, attention has been drawn to the large number of women participating alongside the children of the stones and the Shabab, the young protesters. Despite harsh reprisals and punishments, the women of the West Bank and Gaza demonstrated their solidarity with the young freedom fighters.
World attention focused on the turbulent situation in the West Bank and Gaza. Many countries sent fact-finding delegations to the occupied territories to see at first hand Israel's continued breach of all human rights. David Mellor, then British Foreign Secretary, paid a memorable visit to occupied Palestine, including a tour of the Gaza Strip. Appalled by the misery and deprivation of the Palestinian refugee camps in Gaza, he was compelled to speak out as witness to the tragedy.
Conditions that I saw in the Jabalia camp, in which 52,000 people live in circumstances of the utmost squalor, is that is an affront to civilized values. Nothing is happening beyond the occupation being treated as an entirely military matter. And of course the concern of everybody, not just me, is to try to see some hope being given to the 1.5 million people who live in the occupied territories, that they can have a decent future with basic political and other human rights.
Israeli forces were not the sole perpetrators of acts of violence and repression against Palestinians, as was seen recently in the cities of Hebron, Ramallah, Jerusalem and Nablus. Zionist settlers were permitted to join in the shooting of Palestinians, the raiding and destruction of their homes and belongings. The Secretary General of the United Nations, watchful of the UN's international peacekeeping and security role, and because of the atrocities taking place in the West Bank and Gaza, sent Mark Golding, Political Affairs Advisor, to report on conditions in the refugee camps of the West Bank and Gaza. Golding confirmed the Palestinian problem is a political one.
This is a political problem which needs a political solution. It is not simply a matter of disturbances and disorders in the occupied territories, it is a matter of the rejection by the people of the occupied territories of the situation in which they find themselves. If you're going to, in the long run, ensure the safety and protection of those people, it can only be through a political settlement, a comprehensive, just and lasting political settlement.
The oppressed Palestinians attracted world sympathy, and there were numerous demonstrations in several foreign capitals condemning the Zionist regime and demanding an end to its oppressive practices and the granting of just rights to the Palestinians, including their right to self-determination in an independent Palestinian state established on their homeland. Desperate to stop the uprising, the occupation authorities exerted collective economic punishments, made random arrests, prohibited the sale of fuel in the West Bank, forbade travel from the West Bank to Gaza, where a night curfew was imposed for the first time since its occupation in 1967, claiming that this was necessary to prevent active subversive elements from distributing flyers and inciting rioting.
They then proceeded to cut the West Bank and Gaza off from the rest of the world. Telephone communication lines to Europe and America were cut to prevent contact between leaders of the uprising and PLO officials abroad. A new monetary policy was introduced forbidding Palestinians from bringing in any amount of money without previously obtaining permission from the authorities. Just who ruled the West Bank and Gaza became the challenge between the leaders of the uprising and the occupation authorities. Following instructions from the leaders of the uprising, hundreds of Palestinians resigned their posts in the police, tax and customs departments. Dr. Haydar Abu Shafi, president of the Palestinian Red Crescent in Gaza, warned that heads of health and education administrations would follow suit.
In retaliation, the occupation authorities imposed food and income sanctions. They chopped down olive trees and obstructed farmers from exporting crops to the cities and Palestinian territories occupied since 1948. In addition, merchants were forced to open stores, and random arrest campaigns affected hundreds of Palestinian citizens, including a number of dignitaries held under so-called preventive measures, to stop demonstrations mocking Land Day on the 30th of March from taking place. Palestinian citizens of areas occupied since 1948 were not allowed to enter the West Bank or Gaza, let alone extend financial aid or provide food supplies to their brothers there. The occupation authorities waged a war on world media representatives and proceeded to try and keep such deeds from the eyes of the world by confiscating films, intercepting messages, and barring journalists from the West Bank and Gaza.
The occupation authorities have made desperate attempts by the expulsion of Palestinian leaders to subdue Palestinian morale and weaken the strength of the uprising. On April the 8th, 8 Palestinian citizens were deported to Lebanon, with a further 8 to follow on the 18th of the same month. The authorities plan to pursue their deportation policy as long as the uprising continues. From the start, the Israeli enemy has sought with all available means to abort the uprising, but each time a martyr falls, another young Palestinian appears to replace him.
ضرب الحجر واتجمعوا الأشبال في الحارات والراية صارت بعدها رايات ضرب الحجر واستنفر الأحياء والأموات والآية صارت بعدها
The occupation authorities have spared little to crush the uprising. Taking advantage of the diversion of international focus to the Kuwaiti airline hijacking crisis in April, they implemented an increasingly savage search and destroy policy. The inhabitants of Beta, a village near Nablus, were held responsible for the death of a Jewish settler, a perfect excuse for occupation authorities to destroy farms, demolish houses, cut down trees, and wipe out whole commercial areas in the West Bank and Gaza. Although the hijacking of Al Jabriya, the Kuwaiti aircraft, was meant to divert world attention away from these events, His Highness the Emir, at the meeting of the 5th Islamic Summit Committee in April, chose to refocus attention on the uprising and to re-pledge support for the Palestinian cause in his opening speech.
مهما تكون دواعي لقائنا في هذه المرحلة من المسيرة، فإن السطر الأول في اللقاء تكتبه أيد عزيزة علينا جميعا هي أيدي أبطال الحجارة في فلسطين المجاهدة.
In an address to the people and citizens of Kuwait following the end of the hijack crisis, His Highness reiterated support for the Palestinian cause and Mujahideen fighters. Failing to quell the uprising, the Israelis sought to use other diversionary tactics. On April the 15th, at his home in Tunis, a prominent Palestinian, Khalil al-Wazir, was assassinated. The Israeli authorities mistakenly believed that the death of Abu Jihad would shake the uprising. On the contrary, it merely served to strengthen Palestinian conviction, resulting in an escalation of civil disobedience and fierce clashes in the West Bank and Gaza. Among the many that were injured, 18 Palestinians were killed. A news blackout by the occupation authorities was inevitable. Seeking to silence the voice of the Intifada, exposer of Israeli crimes, the Palestinian press office in Jerusalem was shut down for 6 months. The bilingual Al-Auda magazine ceased publication and 30 journalists were arrested.
The continuation of the Intifada, or uprising, required that Arab leaders meet to discuss ways and means to lend positive support to its progress until all national and just rights of the Palestinians are secured. This includes the right to self-determination and the return and re-establishment of an independent Palestinian state with Al-Quds, Jerusalem, as its capital.
On June the 17th, Algeria hosted an emergency summit of Arab leaders convened to discuss support actions for the Intifada. His Highness the Emir, heading the Kuwaiti delegation, emphasized Kuwait's long-declared support of the Palestinian cause. The Arab leaders were unanimous. Decisions were taken on practical ways to implement financial and political assistance. It was also resolved that an international peace conference for the Middle East should be convened under the auspices of the UN, with due reference to United Nations resolutions and international law.
The Arabs now have a clear vision of the future. The international conference and the participation of the Palestinian Liberation Organization in the peace talks clearly puts the ball in both American and Israeli backyards.
At the Algeria summit, the Arabs reaffirmed their willingness for peace, expressed readiness to participate in an international conference as a step towards a just and comprehensive peace in the Middle East, ensuring justice for the Palestinians. If others are serious in their efforts to achieve lasting peace in the area, they must respond, and in so doing, recognize that the Palestinian Liberation Organization is the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, whose officials have expressed readiness to negotiate with Zionist leaders within the framework of an international conference. For the past months, the heroic Palestinian uprising has imposed itself on the international community and indeed on the full spectra of Israeli politics from extreme right to extreme left. Commanding international media attention, the uprising showed the entire world how the will of the Palestinian people was able to confront the military might of Israel.
The Stone Revolution shed light on the basic elements of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and it is now possible to say that the stone is mightier than the sword. The children and the Shabab of Palestine have revived hope in all Palestinians.
An international conference to resolve the Arab-Israeli conflict is essential, as the problem began with an international resolution and can therefore only be solved by another. History, however, and experience dealing with the Zionist enemy have shown that they will not accept an honorable and just solution, unless compelled to do so by international pressure, brought about by the steadfast struggle of the people of the occupied lands. Until such time, priority should be given to the continuation of the Intifada. The 10th Declaration of the United Leadership of the Uprising, published in early March 1988, states that the Intifada shall continue until the Palestinian people's rights are secured, including the right to return, self-determination, and the establishment of the independent Palestinian state with Al-Quds, Jerusalem, as its capital.
مدينة كل الجروح الصغيرة ألا تخمدين يدي مدينة كل الجروح الصغيرة مدينة كل الجروح الصغيرة مدينة كل الجروح الصغيرة ألا تخمدين يدي مدينة كل الجروح الصغيرة مدينة كل الجروح الصغيرة ألا تخمدين يدي.
The Palestinian people are shouldering the burden of struggle, and it is the duty of Arab and Muslim states to do, by all political and material means, all that ensures the continuation of the uprising, and to assist in reaching the goal of freedom for which they are striving. The Palestinians in the occupied lands are looking to their Arab and Muslim brothers to stand shoulder to shoulder with them. The Islamic Conference Organization salutes the Palestinian people in the occupied lands.
Salutes the children of the stones who raise the flag against tyranny.
Salutes the fighters of the oppressors.
Salutes the martyrs who sacrifice their souls for their homeland,
Palestine. لا صوت يعلو فوق صوت الانتفاضة. No voice shall rise above the voice of the intifada.
Some might interpret the rather enthusiastic embrace that Yasser Arafat offered to you on the occasion of your arrival in Lusaka as evidence of a perhaps hostility or an anger toward Israel. Would that be reaching or going too far?
The enemies of Israel are not our enemies. And the struggle of the Palestinians for independence and for their own home is a struggle we fully support.
Mr. Mandela?
Will you demand reparations from governments like Israel who have, despite international arms embargoes, supplied the South African government with Lobby jets, Gabriel missiles, and given South African government the nuclear capability to annihilate 30 million African people?
The support of South Africa by Israel is well known. It has been condemned at the United Nations and in many other world bodies.